Okay, we can get started. Welcome to this workshop of the Hopkins School Board. I'm Chair Jen Bouchard, and we are trying out a new board meeting format this evening. So if you're joining us via the YouTube live stream, you are part of our innovation this evening as we try out an expanded hybrid version of our board workshops and meetings that allows for more in-person participation. So there are some of us who are in the boardroom this evening. Some of us are accessing the Google Meet remotely. And we are going to begin our workshop this evening with an update from our monitoring committee. And with that, I'll turn it over to our Vice Chair, Shannon Andreessen.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. Just wanted to give everyone a quick update on where the monitoring committee is at. But first, I'd like to express my gratitude to the members of the monitoring committee, Clerk Peterson and Director Kuhl, as well as Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot and Deb Polly. They all have brought really incredible perspectives and skills to the table, and it's been a pleasure to work alongside them so far. I would also like to note that we don't do this policy work in a vacuum. And as we have watched current events unfold in our community and across the nation, we as community leaders recognize the urgency of the work that we are doing. At the same time, we are also sensitive to the need for robust input from our families, our community, and our staff. So having these conversations is not always easy, but they are a critical part of crafting policies that serve our families, empower our staff, and uplift our community's values. So we have been discussing revisions to Hopkins Public School Policy 102, Equal Education Opportunity. While this is a good overall policy, we feel Vision 2031 and our Equity Lens framework requires that we do some adaptations. Our current goal is to add in some language to make the policy more robust, and then use it as an umbrella policy to point to specific policies that go more in depth around particular protected classes of students. We look to our policies around sex, gender, and religion as examples for this. As we draft new policies that fit under this umbrella policy, they will be added as reference points to the policy 102. I'm excited about this work and the framework that has developed. With this in mind, the monitoring committee is finalizing our draft of a gender inclusion policy, which we will present to the board at our next workshop on April 20th, along with recommendations from our Equity and Inclusion Student Advisory. I look forward to that discussion with all of you. Does anyone have any questions? I just have to say it's weird to be able to look up and see all of you. But
Not a question, but a comment. I just really appreciate the holistic approach that the monitoring committee has been taking to this work. I've mentioned many times at this table that we have, really put a lot of work onto our monitoring committee. It's absolutely work that needs to happen for our district to be authentically inclusive and vigilantly equitable. And, this work has kind of come to the fore at various moments, including when we passed the anti-racist resolution last summer, and also as we were setting our goals for the board for this year. And I just wanted to also express my gratitude to the members of that committee and just echo the sentiment of urgency and the priority of doing this work in a truly inclusive way that takes into account the myriad stakeholders in our community. And so I thank you for all of that work that's been happening in your committee and really look forward to the conversation around our gender inclusion policy at the next workshop. Any other comments or questions for Vice Chair Andreessen? Well, thank you, Vice Chair Andreessen. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry-Reed, who will introduce our next suite of agenda items here.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. On the agenda, we have actually resequenced the remaining 3 agenda items for our board and community members. So first, we're going to provide a community education update, a budget update, and then we're going to provide the district budget update, and then our final workshop agenda item will be the staffing update. So I'd like to welcome Director Alex Fisher to the virtual board table to talk about community education and the current state of the community ed budget. I think we all know that the pandemic has hit community education in a particularly difficult way with reduced enrollment in Kids & Co. If you remember, during the first wave of the pandemic, we were forced to lay off and furlough a number of community education staff. And really, these are the staff who are here day in and day out, providing supervision and rich learning environments for our elementary scholars. And so it's been a hard year for them. And I want those staff to know that we really value who they are and what they've done for our students and for our organization, for our families during this really difficult year. And we want our school board and community members to be in touch with an update about the programs and the budget. So I'll welcome Mr. Fisher at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Perry-Reed. Hi, Chair Bouchard and respective board members. Dr. Mary Perry-Reed, thank you so much for your kind words for the community education staff. I completely agree. Our staff have put in blood, sweat, and tears and have been on the front lines for over a year. And we are so incredibly grateful for their effort and their time and their passion that they've given to our families and our community. So I'd like to share with you the budget for community education. And if I may, would it be okay if I present my screen?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Can you see this?
Yes, thank you, Director Fisher.
Thank you. That's great. Okay. So just to provide a little background information on the community education budget, 57% of our budget comes from, of our revenue, comes from patron fees. 19% of our revenue comes from state and federal aid. 17% of our revenue comes from levies, and 17 comes from levies, and 7% comes from other revenue sources. So of those patron fees, you can see that's our largest source of revenue. 52% of those patron fees are made up from Kids & Company revenue. They are our largest revenue source. After that, early childhood provides about 25% of community education revenue through programs like Stepping Stones, ECFE, and Kaleidoscope. 13% of our revenue comes from our enrichment programs. So that would be adult enrichment, youth enrichment, and Camp Royal. And 10% of our revenue comes from our facilities rentals. So this figure, so these numbers come from fiscal year 2018-2019. And you'll see those years throughout this presentation because that was our last regular year. We were not affected by COVID in 2018-2019, so we're using it as a baseline to show comparisons this evening. Kids & Company revenue is projected to be down 45% from 2018-2019 at the end of this year. And enrollment for Kids & Company is down 63% from 2018-2019. So at the end of 2018-2019, we had 951 scholars enrolled in our Kids and Company programs throughout our districts and in our elementary schools. Currently, we have 352 students enrolled. So you can see COVID has really impacted our programs, and one of the tasks ahead of us is rebuilding this program. The impact of COVID, as I mentioned, has had a huge effect. It has affected our revenue in major ways, not only in Kids and Company, which I just showed you, but also facilities use. So as compared to 2018-2019, our facilities use is down 40%. So that would be a revenue from facilities use, down 40%. Our revenue from preschool programs is down 76% from fiscal year 2019. And revenue from our enrichment programs is down 68%. So now what you'll see is our budget that we're submitting to you this evening for review. If you look at the first column there, this is the revenue for community education. So in 2019-20, our audited revenue was $9,599,500. In 2020-21, our original budget was $10,315,520. We revised our budget for revenue, and our revised budget for revenue is $6,987,250. Next year, for 2021-22, we're projecting revenue at $7,972,162. Now we're looking at our expenses. So our expenses in the year 2019-20, the audited expenses for community education was $10,665,103. Our original budget for this year, fiscal year 21, was $11,157,731. We have revised that budget to have we've revised those expenses to be $7,408,455. And our projected expenses for next year, 2021-22, are $7,604,573. So what you're looking at now is revenue over expense or revenue under expense. So in 2019-20, our audited revenue under expense was negative $1,066,098. We originally had our budget revenue under expense at $842,211. And we've revised our revenue under expense to be negative $421,205. Next year, 2021-22, we're projecting a positive revenue over expense of $367,589. We will be so happy once we're back in the positive. We can feel it coming. We're making preparations. It seems to be the trend, and we're just excited to get there. This has been a challenging couple of years for our staff and our programs, but we're looking forward to the future. This is our fund balance. So if you look at our fund balance at the end of 2020-21, we had $1,139,271 combined in our community education fund balance. That's Fund 4. After this year, so at the end of 2021-22, at the beginning of next year, so at the beginning of 2021-22, we will have a fund balance of $718,066. So we are excited about our pursuit of Vision 2031. Community Ed continues to try to be innovative and move as close to Vision 2031 as possible. And we're doing that through our core value of vigilant equity. We've created Royal Connections, which is a low and no pay adult and youth enrichment class option. We're forming strategic partnerships to be innovative. We formed a partnership with Resource West, who provides scholarships for Kids and Company and all-day preschool, so our families have ways to be authentically included, even if they cannot pay the fees. Authentic inclusivity is one of our core values, and so we're developing sliding fee scales and flexible care options for Kids and Company families, and we'll continue to do so in the future. And we're using the core value of optimistic innovation to stay relevant and drive new revenue streams. We have new programming starting at Lindbergh Center that will start in the fall of next school year. And without giving too many details, I'm very excited about some of the fitness and training options we have coming there. And we're being innovative by using idea crowdsourcing. One of the messages we were hearing is that families were confused by the two preschool programs. Kaleidoscope and Stepping Stones was confusing because a lot of families, most families and most staff, quite frankly, did not know the difference between the two. I think most families know what preschool is, but the names Stepping Stones and Kaleidoscope became confusing. So we've begun the process of combining those two programs to have one cohesive Hopkins preschool program, simply called Hopkins Preschool. And this coming year for 2021-22, we will spend this year working with staff and families and community members to integrate those two programs. And we're very excited about that. So that's all I have for you today, and I'd welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you, Director Fisher. Any questions or comments from my board colleagues?
I just had a quick question, Alex, about the facilities use being down. Is that just simply, we think, due to COVID and just not having extra space to rent out and people not gathering in person?
Yeah, it's a good question, Director Anderson. It's really due to COVID because of the restrictions. There were number limitations. For example, we couldn't have more than 25 people in a space, and then we couldn't have anybody. We couldn't rent out our pools. We couldn't rent out our athletic fields. And as restrictions are starting to loosen up and lessen there, we're starting to book more things like dance competitions in our auditorium and more camps on our athletic fields. So we feel like that's turning a corner.
Oh, great. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Director Fisher, I have a quick question for you.
Hi, Director Cool.
So what type of strategy are you using to be able to move into the black? Is there reduction of staff, or how exactly are you working to be able to really overcome the deficits that you felt over the last 2 years?
Excellent question, and it's a hard one to answer because it as I mentioned, it has not been an easy couple of years, and we have had to reduce our staff in community education, which has been excruciatingly painful on both sides. And unfortunately, it has been necessary to right-size our budget. We are in a position now where our fund balance is not in a kind of as scary of a place as it could have been, and so we've worked hard to keep it in a good place. And we've just been very cautious about our expenses, really reducing our expenses. So the combination of being smarter with our marketing, not we used to provide beautiful full catalogs to families, and unfortunately we've had to scale those down quite a bit, because necessity. So now it's full page glossy twofold flyers that are really beautiful, but they're not nearly as robust and bulky as they used to be. So, those are things that we could look at continuing in the future. And right now we've had to cut costs by really being mindful of our expenses.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I know those are tough decisions. I do want to let you know that, my child personally was not able or did not attend Kids & Co this year, and there was a lot of tears shed because some of his best friends are the staff of Kids & Co. And I've got to tell you, a shout out to the staff, because there's two particular people, staff members, that have actually made time for my child online to do chess work, because he fell in love playing chess with them. So I think it's just not enough words to say how amazing of Kids and Co staff that Hopkins has currently.
Well, thank you for saying that, Director Cool. I feel like Kids and Company is such a highly regarded program in our community, and we intend to keep it going in that direction.
And I also want to say my child can beat me in chess now. I don't like that, but I just want to say for the record, it's because of those teachers.
Your secret is safe with me.
Director Fisher, the governor has signaled that summer programming is a priority for him, and I know we're all still anxiously awaiting final numbers in terms of funding for next year. Wondering if there has been any indication of, first, if we will receive any additional funding that could help supplement or augment Camp Royal opportunities this summer, and if we know any details about that.
We do, and I'd like to invite Director Lightfoot, Dr. Lightfoot, to help out here if I get some things wrong. But I believe the legislature just passed the funding for an additional $4 per student for the summer, which will allow additional support. Dr. Lightfoot, would you add anything to that?
Sure. Thank you, Director Fisher. Right now, we did get information from the Department of Education that they would be releasing the additional funds. Approximately right now, the estimate is $4 per hour. Those hours are membership hours for summer programming. MDE has asked that we give them estimates of the number of students that we think would be participating so that they can really use that information to generate the anticipated costs. They are asking for that statewide. We anticipate that as we look at summer programming, what we're trying to do is get an idea from all of our buildings so that we'll have an estimate on number of students who might be interested in participating. We're anticipating that we're looking at a week in July and then probably 2 weeks to follow up in August for a 3-week opportunity to be designed this was the other substantial change that was made, for the ability to have all students who would like to participate be given the opportunity. So that's a substantial opportunity for us to really consider and make sure that we get out in front of our families. That is funded through the additional federal dollars that came in through the state, and the state is utilizing for summer learning.
Excellent. And what is the age range for that opportunity, or grade range, I should say?
My understanding is the way that it's been presented is it is K-12. They have specific information and have requested in their form all grades K through 12. What I think we need to get a little bit better idea of, and we still have some information in through the Department of Education, is how that would correspond with what our present plans are for 10 through 12 grades that we would be looking at, not only with credit recovery, but would it give us some additional opportunities to look at additional learning components that would be beyond credit recovery as well.
Thank you for that. That's good news. Any additional board member questions or comments for Director Fisher? Well, thank you very much, Director Fisher. Appreciated your presentation. And I will pass it back to Dr. Mary Perry Reed.
Thank you very much, Chair Bouchard. And Director Fisher, if you could pass on to the community education staff how much we appreciate them, the school board members, and also cabinet. Really, the entire organization is grateful to the staff in the community education department for everything that they've done this year in impacting our scholars' lives in such meaningful ways. And thank you also for your presentation this evening. So at this time, we're going to move to a district budget update. We have engaged in many, many meetings and conversations at the board table, at the cabinet level with principals, even with board-hosted community engagement sessions around this second year of budget reduction and right-sizing, which was exacerbated by declining enrollment due to COVID. So we've had a number of challenges in front of us that I believe have been tackled very thoughtfully and very strategically under the guidance and leadership of our Director of Business Services, Mr. Chapanduka, as well as the entire cabinet and principals team. And so using the recommendations from the Citizens Financial Advisory Committee, we have put together the preliminary budget for board approval, and we want to use this time during workshop to bring board members up to speed with what that conversation will sound like during the board meeting and be able to address any questions you have. Following the budget update, we'll also provide a brief staffing update because the two obviously go hand in hand, with nearly 85% of our budget being assigned to personnel costs. So I thank Director Tariro Chapanduka for being at the table this evening and for all of his leadership and guidance during this process. Tariro?
Thank you, Dr. Reed. Good evening, Chair Bouchard, respective board members, colleagues, and the community at large. If you may allow me to go ahead and actually present my screen here with a slideshow, which I also shared with the board and leadership team a while ago. Just give me a second here. Can you all see my screen?
That looks good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what I'll start here is to actually present our revised budget. Actually, around this time of the year, we relook at our numbers. Again, based on a series of previous conversations and as part of our presentation to the board and to the community. And some of the components which actually came to play as we started to see the impact of the pandemic, one to our enrollment, as well as some of the extra funding we received from the federal and the state government. So I'll present the revised budget, and then after that, we can look at the preliminary budget for FY22. So the revised budget is for the current year. And again, looking back at the original budget, which was presented to the board in June of 2020, and at that point in time, based on trend upward in enrollment, we had projected that our general fund revenues were going to actually be around $1 or $2.6 million. And putting into consideration that we also did some reductions to the tune of about $2.5 million for FY21, which actually structurally balanced our budget. So our expenditures ended up sitting at $1 or $2.6 million. Fast forward to the beginning of the fiscal year, and not knowing at that point in time how much resources we're going to get from the federal government as part of the stimulus package. Also not knowing how our enrollment were going to trend from an actual standpoint into our buildings. And in around October, we started to see, the trend in the downward trend in our enrollment, which actually forced us to start looking at our initial projected revenues and start revising them based on the actual enrolled students who were actually coming into our buildings. So that being said, we saw a shift of almost about $1 million from what had initially been projected. And what the actual numbers were showing, and our funding is mostly based on the actual numbers. We also received more information from the federal government as far as how much of the resources we're going to receive as part of supplementing our general fund in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic. So what I have here is a revised budget, which is also factoring in that component of the resources we received for the CARES Act fund through the ESA 90%, which was about 725,000. ESA 9.5%, which was about 143,000. GEAR, which was about 136,000, and the coronavirus relief funds, which were about $1.9 million. So in total, we got allocated $2,972,296, for extra funding in FY21. Out of the $2,972,296, we have received $1.9 million, which we actually had to claim reimbursement from the state, since it was actually the deadline was short-lived. It was a 6-month period where we had to account for any expenditures which were directly related to COVID-19. So after factoring in all those components, we revised our general fund revenue for FY21 to sit at $104,125,512. So that's our general fund, $104,125,512. And then we started looking at our general fund expenditures, trying to identify those components we could adjust, just knowing that our enrollment was not going to be at the same level as we had initially projected. And also putting into consideration that 82% of the district's expenditures are people. So salaries and benefits, that's a very difficult adjustment to make in the middle of the year. So we factored in some of the expenditures we had to move between some of the components within the general fund and the CARES Act funds. So at the end, we are projecting our fund general fund expenditures to be sitting at $104,854,687, which actually leaves us with a deficit of about $729,000. And when this pandemic hit, and after looking at our fiscal year 2019-2020, and some of the cost savings we made due to the fact that, buildings had to close, and we had some cost savings. So we put aside some resources, just knowing that we were anticipating that our projections may not match what we had initially submitted. So we have some resources on the side, which will actually be able to absorb the $729,000 without us going into our general fund. So that's what I have for the revised budget for FY 2020-21. And the next slide, we'll actually jump into our FY 21-22, starting with the building allocation components and assumptions. And I know some of this information is related to some of the discussions we've been having with the board and the community, starting with those assumptions we used when we started to look at what our budget will look like for fiscal year 21-22. The first foundational assumption, obviously, being us putting together the formula for the base allocation, which was actually covered under the predictable staffing model. So the predictable staffing model has been shared with the board, has been shared with the leadership, and that is what we have used as part of our modeling for creating the budget for fiscal year 21-22. We also put into consideration that we are budgeting at a flat federal and state revenues, meaning that the usual 2% inflationary components which we usually receive from the state have not been factored in, and we've not really gotten good enough information from the state in as far as whether we'll receive anything. I know the governor had actually provided some preliminary suggestions to maybe us receiving a 1% increase, but those conversations are still ongoing. So at this point in time, we're just budgeting based on the information we have at hand. We also factored in the 3% cost of living adjustment and the additional 2% fringe benefit increases into the predictable staff model, and those components have been included as part of the costing. We also factored into the budget discretionary and categorical dollars, which are flowing into the buildings to supplement the base allocations at the discretion of the building leaders and their teams and priorities in each and every one of our buildings. And some of this categorical funding include compensatory dollars, achievement and integration, our federal programs with title dollars. So those have been allocated into buildings. We also factored in an allocation for operation. So operational allocations, which mostly are the supplies, purchase services, contracted services, and some of the material buildings may need to operate on a daily basis. What we did not factor into our allocations for fiscal year 21-22 at this point in time is the CARES Act funds. We just got information from the state on Friday that the district will receive an allocation of about $2.6 million for the ASA2 funds. So those funds have not been factored into this budget. Again, those are based on a guided and guidance from the state and the federal government, and they are also lose it or use it or lose it funds. So those will actually relook at them later on in the year and see what that means based on some of the needs which we are seeing in our buildings and our departments as the coronavirus impact still continues. So those are the assumptions and the components which we factored in as we looked at the fiscal year 22 budget allocations. So the next slide is the preliminary numbers. So what I have here is a projected general fund revenue of $105,032,924. And the $105,032,924 includes the components within the general education aid as well as the capital projects levy. So in the past, with the capital projects levy, a portion of it has been actually allocated into the general fund, and the portion of it has been allocated into our capital and construction projects for any of the refreshments in our devices, as well as the infrastructure within our technology. So those dollars, we've actually moved them so that they are part of the general fund. Although they are under restrictions, since they can only be used for those components which are allowable from the state statute for capital projects mostly in information technology. That being said, we also, through our predictable staffing model, through our reductions at the department level, we also were able to adjust our expenditures across our system. So right now our expenditures are sitting at $105,032,924 to actually give us a structurally balanced budget for fiscal year 22. The next slides actually show the breakdown of that $105,032,924 and where it's being allocated. So what I have here is the school allocations, which are amounting to about $64,575,597, which is about 61% of the total budget. And these dollars are actually going directly into the buildings, based on the predictable staffing model, based on our special education allocations, based on our categorical dollars, as well as our operation allocations and discretionary funds. So departments have a 6% allocation, which amounts to $6,783,893. And these allocations are actually going to business services, our human resources, our innovation, design and learning department, our communication department, our governance and management, which includes the board, the superintendent's office, some of the components which are actually impacting buildings. For example, the graduation expenses are also budgeted within these allocations. And then the other component, which is the remaining 32%, is actually going to fund districtwide allocations, so which is about $33,673,434. So districtwide allocations are mostly funds which are actually impacting buildings, but they are actually budgeted at the central level. Things like transportation, our operations and maintenance, with our custodians, our utilities, they are all budgeted into the district-wide allocations. Our workers' compensation insurance, our property and casualty insurance, our other post-employment benefits and retiree premiums, they are all funded out of the district-wide allocation. So basically, the district-wide allocations are impacting our system, and some of them are either mandated or required by statute or required as part of our business practices. So that's about 32%. So in reality, when we look at the whole entire picture, we have at least about close to 94% of our funding really impacting directly our buildings. And with that, it actually puts our total general fund allocations at that $105,032,924. The next slide, actually, after working as a system with our cabinet, we also factored in the 7% reductions at the department level. So this slide actually just show some of those allocations which are actually being impacted within the different departments as part of the reductions for the entire component of our budget. So those 7% reductions amount to about $1.1 million, which is being reduced out of our different central office departments. With that, I will take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Director Chapanuka. Any questions or comments from my board colleagues?
Chair Bouchard.
Yes.
Hi, I just had can everyone hear me? I heard an echo, sorry. Thank you for that presentation, Director Chapanuka. I just had a clarifying question around the CARES relief funding that you listed out for that's impacting this year's budget. Did I hear you say that we only received 1.9 million of the 2,972,000? Is the rest of that coming, or are we not getting it because we didn't use it?
Thank you, Director Anderson. Yes, so at this point in time, I can hear some echoes.
Sorry, I'll mute.
Thank you. Yes, so at this point in time, we have received that 1,966,000. So what happens with the CARES funds, since they are part of the federal program, we can only claim the reimbursement once we made the expenses. So we use our general fund to actually pay for the goods and services, and then we claim for a reimbursement. So right now we are in the process of putting together a listing of the items which will be claiming for the remaining close to $1 million out of the ESSA1 allocations. So we are planning to actually do a reimbursement claim impacting fiscal year 21.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. And so we're thinking that that's more than adequate to cover the 729 deficit that we're projecting?
Correct, because with the case funds, they are actually guided by certain specific. So those expenses have to really be related to COVID-19. So we're just trying to identify, and we did a lot of improvements within our buildings with our ventilation systems. We put some ionizers. All the PPEs we are getting, those are all funded out of those case funds. Otherwise, if we didn't have the case funds, we would be in a totally different financial position at this point in time. So we are very grateful for those resources because they really did make an impact, because they lessened the deficit which the district would have experienced if we didn't receive those resources.
Absolutely. And I think that we were allowed to innovate pretty nicely with outdoor classroom spaces, et cetera, hopefully with the use of those funds too. Thank you for that clarification.
Chair Bouchard?
Yes, Director Peterson.
So just going off of Director Andreessen's, Vice Chair Andreessen's questions, I just wanted a little bit more clarification around where that leaves our current fund balance. Because when I look at it, I see that we were supposed to be getting just shy of $3 million. We've gotten $2 million. And it seems like we're going to potentially take care of that $729K deficit that we're seeing in 2021. Do we have any indication of any growth or decline in our fund balance as we look at those numbers?
Thank you, Director Pedersen. So part of our intention, and as had been actually put forth by CFAC to the board in January, was not to touch our fund balance. So when we were planning for this, we made sure that the impact was not coming from fund balance. So our fund balance will still stay healthy. Right now it's sitting at about 7.8%. We are not touching any of the fund balance to address this delta. So our fund balance is not being touched for FY21, and we're also not touching our fund balance for FY22.
Director Adams.
Yes, thank you, Chair Bouchard. Torero, you mentioned that we're getting another $2.6 million of ESSER 2 funds. I'm just curious, how are those going to be used? I'm sure, like everything that comes from the federal government, there's restrictions on how we can use it and when we have to use it. So could you update us on that?
Thank you, Director Adams. Yes, so part of the usage for those funds, the $2.6 million, which we just got information from MDE on Friday. So part of it was a continuation of the allowable use of the initial ESSA1 funds. And part of it was to also address what MDE considers to be learning loss among our students. So one of the things we are trying to do is to be very innovative, since these are one-time funds, in addressing some of the components within the gaps which we have seen among our scholars is impacted by the pandemic. The other component which the funds can also be used for, the government has allowed us to also use those funds to address some of our construction needs in our buildings. So when we start talking about flex spaces, some of the adjustments we may need to do within our system, some of the components within our transportation areas, those are also allowable on top of addressing, our summer programs, on top of addressing our digital transformation within our buildings. So that's just an expanded list of some of the items we are looking at. We don't have a solid plan at this point in time, since we haven't even started the application process on what that will look like with those resources.
Is there a deadline that we have to use those funds by?
Correct. So we have to use those funds by September of 2023.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Director Cool.
Thank you. Tariro, great job on the presentation. Quick clarification. I know we had talked about this in the past, but could you remind me, special education funding, is that grouped as one of the departments, or does that kind of get broken up more by the school? Could you just remind me on that piece?
Sure, Director Cool, thank you for that question. And knowing that the majority of special education dollars are actually going to the buildings. So most of the dollars are actually being allocated as part of our predictable staffing model into the buildings. And then we have a skeleton remaining of the dollars which are actually supporting central office staff. And there are certain components, I know sometimes, within special services, there are certain sometimes devices which may be needed for students. So those are actually budgeted at the central level. I don't know, Director Contreras, do you have anything to add on to that?
Yes, thank you, Director Chapanduka. That is correct. The majority of the budget is for buildings because that's the majority of our budget is staffing. But there is some district level staffing, and then there's also programs such as the Pavilion program, T+ programming that's not associated with one of our schools. And so those would be the anomalies. And then, like Tariro said, our district staff.
So just one follow-up question then. So if we were taking a look at specifically special education, would we say that funding has kind of that same reduction that we're seeing all the way across the board? Or is that more flat just based on the needed services there?
It's kind of both. That's a good question. We have to maintain maintenance of effort, and there's some reductions that we have done as well in our department. So it's kind of a both.
And just to add to that, again, special education, we are underfunded. So we are receiving about 60%, and then general fund carries about 40% of those costs within special education. So when we start to look at the impact to the general fund, then we need to make some adjustments since 40% of the funding into special services is actually coming out of the general education dollars.
Thank you for that clarification.
Any additional questions or comments from my board colleagues? Director Chapanduka, when we started our budgeting process this year, we were looking at between 2 and 3 million in reductions. And the slide you present shows us approximately 1 million in reductions at the departmental levels. And I know that additional financial reductions are being achieved through the predictable staffing model. Can you give the board, I guess I'm looking for a total in reductions that we ended up landing on. Dollar amount.
Sure. So initially, when we did presentation to the board and started looking at what the projections were looking like for FY22. So our budget was close to about $100 million. And our expenditures were sitting about close to almost, $103 million. So we're looking at about $3 to $3.5 million, putting into consideration, those reductions within our enrollment, as well as no additional funding coming out of the inflationary components. So, and we also put into consideration the fact that our compensatory dollars were also not looking good. So we received word from the governor that they will be funding our compensatory dollars at the same level as they funded this year. So that really did play a good, important factor, which kind of reduced our deficit to almost about $2.5 million. So when we look at that reduction, about $1.1 million coming from departments, the remaining almost $1.5 to $2 million, that's coming out of the reduction within the predictable staffing model or any of the other adjustments we've made within district-wide budgets.
Great, thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. Any additional questions or comments from my board colleagues? Wonderful. Thank you so much, Director Chapanduka, and for all of your work throughout the entire process, and certainly for the presentation tonight that really just both distilled the information for us and for the community, and then also gave us the opportunity to ask clarifying questions before we see you again during the meeting.
Thank you. And I want to thank our cabinet. I want to thank our principals. I want to thank our staff. I want to thank the business services staff for a job well done in assisting with all this work. There's a lot of people who have been involved with putting all this information together. So I just want to thank everyone for their support, and great job in us resizing, reducing, and making sure that we are being creative with our resources. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'll turn it back to Dr. Mary Perry Reid.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard, and thank you again, Director Chapanduka, for your report and for your recognition of all of the staff involved in that process. And we truly appreciate your leadership and fiscal insights all along the way. And as you mentioned, Director Chapanduka, 82% of our district's budget is salary and benefits. And so with this reduction that we've been talking about this evening, the truly unfortunate result is a reduction in staff, in personnel. And so we have Dr. Lightfoot here with us at the virtual board table, well, actually at the physical board table this evening, to help our school board and community members understand what this impact will look like, because later on during the board meeting, our school board will be asked to approve the first staffing resolution. So Dr. Lightfoot, if you could explain the aggregate view of potential staff reduction during this very unfortunate time. Thank you.
Certainly, and thank you for the opportunity to really kind of add a little bit more context to what is in front of us with the task at hand. And specifically, in February, we presented the resolution which directed the administration to move forward with the budget review, to do the work that is culminating in front of you this evening with the preliminary budget documentation. From that, as been mentioned, 82% of our fiscal resource goes into human resource and the staffing, salary, and benefits that correspond with what we're able to support with our programming. So the next resolution that will be in front of you this evening really directs the administration to go forward and, given the amounts available within the preliminary budget, to make those specific reductions that are necessary in this case and modifications to program to specifically meet the terms that have been outlined with the available fiscal resource. And has been noted that is a reduction in staff. And so right now, as we've been gathering information and working off of the predictable staffing model, what is changing within the context of how we're working our budget this year is that sites have greater discretion in when they have available resource to look at how they are utilizing that resource locally to design the programming elements and utilize it toward staffing allocations differently than they may have before. So what that is we have general predictable allocations, which we presented to you on a couple occasions now in workshops. And based on those initial entry-level, base-level staffing models, then buildings are building up their staffing cadres with the available discretionary dollars, compensatory dollars, revenue from achievement and integration, and other fiscal sources that contribute to their total budget picture. So what we've been working off of in order to present, at least right now, the opening elements of what our staff reduction will look like are beginning with the base model allocations, starting with that, and then working with the buildings as they move forward with finalizing those specific choices to really put together what that FTE looks like for licensed physicians, what it looks like for non-licensed physicians, and as well what it looks like for any other expenditures that have to happen in order to support the operation of the school. Right now, with this first phase that we're looking at, specifically the timelines in statute when we have any reductions that are necessary for licensed teaching positions, we have a statutory timeline that we need to follow that allows for individuals who are licensed to go through any seniority processes that are involved, and specifically if there are individuals who have achieved tenure, that we also allow for an unrequested leave of absence program. If there is the requirement that budget limitations do not allow us to fully engage our complete tenured staff. So what our task is right now, given the terms of the budget, is to now go through and look at the available amounts of FTE, look at what buildings are using as discretionary allocations, and then determine which positions we can fund, which ones we cannot, and then specifically work with those individuals who would be impacted because we do not have additional positions available to support their employment for the upcoming school year. So our administrators are in process with that right now and are facilitating any upcoming conversations prior to next week. What you will see on April 20th is the finalized list of individuals who will be impacted based on the available fiscal resource. We will present to you a series of resolutions, and those resolutions will outline the necessary reductions specific to each licensed staff category that we will have prepared for you, and we will then ask for your review and approval of that as part of our staffing process. So that outlines really the process that we will be engaging through within the month of April. To give you just kind of a general picture of what this looks like comparatively from last year into this year, with just some general amounts. Last year, right now, at around this time, we were looking just at the secondary 7 through 12 staffing at about 148, roughly estimated FTEs that we were working with. Right now, as we enter into the staffing picture with our base allocations and our discretionary allocations, that's coming in around 138. So we're about 10 FTEs in the reduction area within our 712 programming. Likewise, in the elementary, we are in a similar space when we think about the complete level of programming within classrooms. It's about right now that range of 7 to 9 FTEs that we're looking at. The reason I can't give you the specific exact amount is that sites are still working through how they can utilize those available dollars and really being diligent about what they can look at specifically as they consider adult to student ratios, as they consider specific programming, and as they anticipate anything that they might not have anticipated and how much they hold in reserve before they make those final allocations. So that's pretty much where we sit right now with the staffing elements that we're in process with. We continue to review and refine this work. And then after we've made the necessary adjustments, we will move into specific assignment placements. And that work generally occurs throughout the end of April and beginning of May. So there's the process. There's the basic set of information. I'm more than happy at this point to address specific questions related to any of that information that might be helpful to the board.
Thank you, Dr. Lightfoot. Any questions or comments from my board colleagues? Oh, Director Cool.
Director Cool, you're muted, even though we can hear you at the table.
Yes, my apologies. I was trying to have fun by myself there. Sorry. Just a quick clarification. You had mentioned K through 6, 7 to 9 would be the number. Is that total or is that per location?
It's a total district-wide. It depends on where sites are using specific allocations and how they're using those for grade level configurations.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Andreessen.
Yes, thank you. I just had some questions about the forecast and just how this works with staffing. One of the things that we've been able to see is I understand the reasoning behind not assuming that we're going to get more funding from the state or the federal government, but does that then put us in a position where we're letting staff go because we can't, it's not part of our predictable staffing model, and then we do have the funding. I mean, this is just how budgets work for schools, right? We never know how much money we're going to have before we have to figure out staffing. But I'm just wondering if having those funding assumptions will then get us to the point where we're letting staff go, and then if we do have the funding to have more staff, we won't have them available. Does that question make sense?
It makes complete sense, and thank you for addressing it. It really does expand upon the complexity of the school financing landscape that we have to take a look at. And as it's biennially funded, and this is a funding year, that unknown is one that we have to walk into. And we have to be mindful of being good stewards, but at the same time, not being overly drastic with a reduction, as you identified, if we are going to get funds coming up into the future that might offset some of these staff reductions. So we're trying to be mindful of that. And as we always try to plan, and where this model gives a little bit greater responsiveness to, is that we would then look at any additional funding that might come in to be considerate of the sites at the discretionary level. And so that's what we've had the dialogue with as a cabinet and with our principals, that if and when dollars become available, our ability to be agile with those dollars will be very responsive. And part of our goal is, as soon as we know, best case scenario, if we get that information by the end of May and we have a legislative session that finishes on time, fingers crossed, double crossed. If we can get to that point, then certainly we can be responsive before the end of the school year. Sometimes that session goes well into June and July, and then we try to be as responsive as we can. One of the other measures that we try to take a look at is the use of something called targeted staffing, which is what we kind of hold in reserve. And what we do is utilize those funds to address any scheduling issues, enrollment fluctuations, and as part allows us to be a little bit more responsive and flexible for exactly as you identify. We have an indication that the legislature is finishing and we're waiting for some final confirmations, but we can move forward more quickly with those dollars. We have funds in reserve that allow us to do that in a more agile way. So we've created some specific structures to allow us to address that. Is it an exact science? No. In part, it's always the level of risk that we were willing to assume. If we're wrong on any funding estimations, that we would contribute to the overall budget picture. And part of what you're proving this evening is the approach which allows us to know what we can work from as a base level.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from my board colleagues? Okay, Dr. Mary Perry Reed, any final words before we take a break here?
Well, just in the spirit of gratitude, I'd also like to thank Dr. Lightfoot for his work and partnership during this time. He's been, he's experienced as having a wealth of information and being able to share expertise around staffing and also around the budgeting process. So I want to thank Dr. Lightfoot and the HR department for all that they do during this time to support our principals. This is a very difficult time for principals with, not only contemplating which staff members perhaps will not be able to be maintained by their budget or retained by their budget, but also thinking about positions that do have to be filled. So it's a coupling of who are we not able to keep and also who needs to be hired. So it's a very busy time, very stressful time for our principals. And I think that Dr. Lightfoot and our HR department do a great job of supporting our leaders during this time. So thanks to you, Nick, and Tariro and Alex for your presentations this evening, and we look forward to a productive board meeting.
Director Adams, did you have a question?
I did not. That was user error.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure. Excellent. Well, I echo Dr. Mary Perry Reed's sentiment of gratitude to our three presenters tonight. As we all know, there is so much work that happens to prepare the information that comes before the board, and we sincerely appreciate the opportunity to engage with you in a slightly more informal context during our workshop so we can get our questions answered before the meeting. So appreciate your time and your wisdom this evening. Looks like we have time for a 15-minute break, and so I'll see you back here shortly before 7. Thank you all. Okay, we can get started. This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is called to order at 7 p.m. I am Chair Jen Bouchard, and I'd like to welcome our community members who are joining the meeting via the YouTube live stream. We are trying out a different meeting format tonight that allows for more in-person participation. And so community members who are desiring to come to board meetings in person, now we have a limited seating availability here in the room with us if you would like to come participate in person. Of course, you are still welcome to access the meeting via the YouTube live stream. We will continue to stream those live throughout the duration of the pandemic. Those of us who are wearing masks are physically present in the boardroom, as you may have guessed. And we also have members of our team who are joining us remotely via the Google Meet. So just in the interest of clarity, so our community understands which board members are in the call, I'll just ask my board colleagues to confirm that you're with us. Director Adams.
Here.
Director Ahmed. Vice Chair Andreessen.
Here.
Director Khan.
Here.
Director Kuhl.
Here.
Director Peterson.
I am here.
Excellent. And I'm Chair Jen Bouchard. So our first agenda item is open agenda. And this is typically the time during the meeting when we take public comment. We are offering two ways to make public comment before the school board. The first way is to leave a voicemail at a phone number that is available in the board packet, along with instructions for leaving your public comment, and we will play your voicemail during the public comment portion of the meeting. The second option is to physically attend the meeting and make public comment here at the table, and you would be visible in the Google Meet to community members watching via the YouTube live stream. We did not receive any voicemails this evening, nor did we have anyone submit a public comment card for the meeting. So with that, we'll move into our reports. And it does not look like we have any student board reps with us this evening. So I will turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry Reed for our superintendent's report.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. I always love hearing from our scholars. I'm a little disappointed that they're not here, but hopefully they will be here next time because that is always a highlight of our meetings. So I'm going to share my screen to present just a few slides. And can you see the screen okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, very good. Well, we are back in session. We've had a full week of spring break. Today we held our weekly Tuesday meeting with principals to discuss budget items, a family and staff survey that we are organizing, and some other key items. And we provided we began the meeting by providing a space for each principal to share a brief update about how their scholars and staff are experiencing school post-spring break. And so we heard lots of good things. Principals noted that attendance has been fairly strong yesterday and today, with a few families who were either quarantining because they had traveled or keeping their children home for a few days because others had traveled. But other than that, attendance has been strong. Principals also shared that staff seem low-key or upbeat. Both are good things because we've been worried about staff perhaps being worried about increasing positive cases and things like that. So it was good to hear from each of the principals, including our early learning director, on the happenings at the school sites the first 2 days of this week. Principal Ballard also shared that some of her scholars have been vaccinated, so that was a nice surprise for all of us to hear. Just a reminder to our board members and community members that this week our K-6 scholars are beginning their 5-day per week in-person learning model. So we were adding Fridays to the elementary in-person scholars learning. At the secondary level, our 7th through 12th grade scholars began their 4-day per week learning model the week before spring break. And so we will continue the 4-day weeks for 7th through 12th grade scholars, with Fridays continuing to be an asynchronous learning day. And that's mostly due to our secondary teachers facilitating hybrid instruction, which involves increased demand and workload on the teachers. Also, our Harley Hopkins director, Sarah Chauvin, wanted all of you to know that preschool registration is now open for the 21-22 school year. A couple of other key highlights. I wanted to recognize our communications and marketing team led by Director Jolene Goldati, as well as our junior high principals, Campy and Aromaselli. They work together to organize and execute a virtual conversation with our community called Where We All Belong, Building an Anti-Racist World. We had 106 streaming views after 205 people registered, and then in a post-event survey, 100% of respondents said that they would likely attend another event hosted by Hopkins. Almost all respondents reported that they were extremely satisfied with the event, and many individuals shared that they shared other topics that they're hoping we would consider covering in the future. So this is really great news as we looked at that feedback. I personally listened to the 90-minute conversation and was really, really impressed with our 2 student facilitators, and also with Leanne and Julius, our junior high principals, who were really wise and poised, vulnerable even, and really masterful in the way that they provided comments and reflections and advice to parents of our adolescents around how to talk with your teen or tween about race and racism. So that was a successful event. Also wanted to share that we've had more than 90 participants, staff, parents, community members, and scholars participate in 6 weeks of Reimagine task forces. There were 7 different task forces, and we're organizing a thoughtful closeout for those teams. These teams will be invited to deliver their recommendations to key groups or committees within the Hopkins district. Also, I can send this slide deck to board members in case you haven't viewed the Where We All Belong event, then you can follow that link and watch it. It was really excellent. And then finally, just a couple of comments about where we are now with COVID mitigation. We can share that student cases are slightly rising, primarily because more students are testing. So the impact of students testing at higher rates and not being vaccinated means that we will receive increased notifications of positive cases. Our case management team continues to check in every morning and will continue providing guidance to schools when whole classes or even buses of scholars need to be quarantined due to close contact with a positive case. Most of our staff are not needing to quarantine at this time, and those determinations are made on a case-by-case basis, depending on whether a close contact has had 1 shot or both, and also within how many days. So, with many to most of our staff being vaccinated and the risk of transmission while following mitigations is very low, it's really important that we provide an opportunity for all of our staff to be vaccinated, and it's really important that we emphasize the importance of continuing to follow mitigation strategies, because both of those factors help us mitigate COVID to the greatest extent it can be mitigated. We are planning a family communication tomorrow, encouraging families who have traveled to obtain a COVID test within that 3 to 5 day window of return. And I did want to let the board know that at this time we are not talking about pivoting to distance learning or anything of that nature at this time. However, we are encouraging all staff to consider getting vaccinated or be vaccinated, to follow mitigation measures, and we're encouraging families to follow the CDC and MDH guidelines related to spring break activities and travel. So I'll take questions from board members if you have them at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Perry Reed. Any questions or comments from my board colleagues? Okay, well, thank you very much. I had the opportunity to watch the Where We All Belong program as well and was incredibly impressed. There are, I was going to say very few things I do just as a parent, but what I mean is within the Hopkins School District. I, typically have my board member hat on, and I watched it as a parent and as somebody who was, seeking guidance, and it was really incredible and fulfilling and made me so proud to be part of this community in Hopkins. So my gratitude to both principals and the student facilitators who did an excellent job. So with that, I would look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Any discussion? Seeing none, Clerk Peterson.
Director Adams. Director Ahmed. Okay. Should I start again?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Director Adams. We're approving the agenda. Okay.
So we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda, and Clerk Peterson is doing the roll call vote. And take it away, Clerk Peterson.
All right. Director Adams. Director Ahmed. Director Andreessen.
Aye.
Director Khan.
Aye.
Director Cool.
Aye.
Director Peterson. Aye. And Chair Bouchard.
Aye, thank you, Clerk Peterson. We have 5 ayes, 0 nays. Motion carries. Next, I would look for a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Any discussion? Seeing none, Clerk Peterson.
Director Adams. Director Ahmed. Vice Chair Andreessen.
Aye.
Director Khan.
Aye.
Director Cool.
Aye.
Director Peterson. Aye. And Chair Bouchard.
Aye, thank you, Clerk Peterson. Could you call Director Adams one more time?
Director Adams. Steve?
Director Adams, we're not able to hear you, so there might be something happening with your audio. So we have 5 ayes, 0 nays, motion carries. Next, we'll move to the Treasurer's Report with Treasurer Adams. Steve, you're muted. Steve, can you hear me? trying to see if I can see Steve in the videos. Is he muted? Okay. Okay. So the treasurer's report is in our packet, and the financial disbursements are in the amount of $4,631,162.62 for the period of March 9th, 2021 through March 29th, 2021. And I would look for a motion to approve the treasurer's report.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
I have a motion, a second, to approve the treasurer's report. Any discussion? Seeing none, Clerk Peterson.
All right. I'm going to wait. I saw Director Adams leave. I'm hoping he's going to come back in.
Perfect.
So I'll go in reverse order today.
Fun.
Chair Bouchard.
Aye.
Director Peterson. Aye. Director Kuhl.
Aye.
Director Kahn.
Aye.
Vice Chair Andreessen.
Aye.
Director Ahmed. And Director Adams. I'm sure he would approve of your report, Jen.
Well, yeah, I am no Treasurer Adams. Let's put it that way. So we have 5 ayes, 0 nays. Motion carries. Next, we'll move into new business. And we are taking a look at some policies in first reading. And I'll turn it over to Vice Chair Andreessen, who heads up our monitoring committee.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. We have one policy for your review. It is policy 957, relations with law enforcement authorities. The monitoring committee had a robust discussion about this policy in regards to community and student requests to keep the environment at Hopkins Public Schools a learning environment. We also discussed paying special attention to the impact of the school to prison pipeline. After consulting with our district attorney and administration, we feel confident that this policy aligns with our district's values. And I invite Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot to provide further details.
Thank you, Vice Chair Andreessen. Specifically with our relations with law enforcement authorities, this policy is really a specific set of regulations about how our administration will interact with and, if engaged with investigative or arresting matters with law enforcement agencies, have specific protocols that can be followed in order to ensure the protection of students, staff, and community regarding the district values and making sure that we can positively support individuals in a respectful way. So the specifics that are outlined here are basically the regulations. The committee did take a look at the regulations and at the present time has no modifications regarding any of the specifics of the matters that are here related to the specific regulation. This is policy 956, 957 with the regulations, and specifically does not have a corresponding Minnesota School Board Association policy. It is a local policy and is one that the monitoring committee completed its review on with no specific recommendations. If there are questions, we would entertain those specifically the board members at this time.
Any questions or comments? I had one. I'm looking at the roles and responsibilities section. And in section A, it says police officers are encouraged to work through the liaison officers at the school to better coordinate and facilitate the interviewing of students. Can you clarify what we mean by liaison officers? We no longer have an SRO at the high school. and wondering what that role of liaison officer is in Hopkins, and because it is a local policy, if we should be looking at that language.
Excellent question. Thank you, Chair Bouchard. I'm happy to take a start with it. We do have points of contact within our local policing agencies that do specifically work with and try to build relationships with our school communities. So specifically, as we think about the Hopkins Police Department and Officer Jessica, which many of our students know, we typically try to make sure that if there are those contacts and relationships, that we try to work collaboratively with those individuals. So while we have connections, I think this language is identified before. If there were specific liaison officer roles, we could utilize that. But when we think of the term liaison, it might also mean those relationships that we have established within the local police department connections as well.
Thank you very much. So that helps me understand better. And I think, yeah, the language of liaison, it allows us to really work within our dynamics here in Hopkins instead of having, locked in language around an SRO. So that does seem to make sense. Another area I was wondering about was, excuse me, I have to go back to the packet here. I'm in section 2 under procedures, under section A, which is arrest, and subsection 1 and then D, the principal should attempt to notify the parents and guardian immediately and document the contact. Was there discussion around putting stronger language there that parents and guardians should be notified, that there has to be a point of contact if their student is being arrested at a school building?
Yeah, great question. We did have that dialogue as well with outside counsel to determine if we could include such language. And as usually the arresting documentation outlines that they do have the authority to do so. And so what we can control is the parent communication that we would have. However, what we can't control is the ability for them to arrest as has been specified on any court documentation. This part of our conversation was how can we ensure as much as possible what that is for parent and guardian contact, and as much as we can engage parents and guardians, we attempt to do so. But if we are not able to reach them, that cannot be a condition that we could refuse to comply, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. So am I understanding correctly that state statute allows for an officer to come into a school building and arrest a student without their parents being notified? I just want to make sure I'm understanding that correctly.
Correct. That's what we were informed.
Thank you. Okay, those are the questions I had. Any other questions or comments from my board colleagues? Okay, so with that, I would look for a motion that the board approve policy 956 in first reading. Further, the board directs the administration to prepare the policies with suggested revisions, of which there were none, for approval in second reading at the next meeting as part of the consent calendar.
I so move.
I have a motion, and I have a second. Thank you. I have a motion and a second to approve policy 956, and I'll turn it over to you, Clerk Peterson. Oh, I'm sorry. Any further discussion? I'm screwing up my lines here. Seeing none, Clerk Peterson.
Excellent. Thanks, Chair Bouchard. Director Adams.
Aye.
Hi. Director Ahmed. Director Andreessen.
Aye.
Director Khan.
Aye.
Director Kuhl.
Aye.
Director Peterson. Aye. And Chair Bouchard.
Aye, thank you, Clerk Peterson. We have 6 ayes, 0 nays, motion carries. Director Adams, I'm glad that your tech problems got figured out there. I just gave the most pathetic treasurer's report ever. And so let's just say you were missed for those 5
I look
minutes.
forward to seeing it in replay.
Yeah, I'll second that. I love your treasurer's reports. It was very missed. You always add a little something.
I didn't have that special Treasurer Adams flair. All right, we'll move to our next agenda item, which is the preliminary approval of the budget, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry Reed.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. So just for some framing before we invite Director Chapanduka to present, back in early November of 2020, under the leadership and guidance of our Director of Business Services, we began to engage our school board in conversations about developing budget parameters and educational programming for the district's fiscal year 21-22 budget. We then worked with our Citizens Financial Advisory Committee, which is a team of financial experts who looked at districts' audited results, assigned and unassigned fund balances, pension funding, enrollment, and the state's projections in order to provide budget recommendations to the school board. We then subsequently used CFAC's recommendations to build this budget that you will hear about this evening. And along the way, there have been numerous meetings, engagements, other activities to get us to this point, including multiple school board workshops, board and community engagement sessions, and weekly Reimagine Our Schools meetings with principals, as well as weekly cabinet budgeting meetings. So the results of this work include a predictable staffing model for each school site that was collaboratively built with leaders across the system, along with the Business Services Department team, discretionary allocations to the schools, central department reduction and restructuring decisions, as well as this preliminary fiscal year 22 budget. So I'd like to invite Director Chapanduka to the table at this time. And following his presentation, our recommendation is that the Hopkins School Board approve the fiscal year 2021 revised budget and the fiscal year 21-22 preliminary budget. Director Chapanduka.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Perry Reid. Good evening, Chair Bouchard. Good evening, Dr. Mary Perry Reid. Good evening, respective board members, colleagues, and the community at large. If you can allow me, I'll go ahead and actually present my screen here. As alluded to by the board chair and our superintendent, Dr. Mary Perry Reid, the ask for the board is to approve the revised 2021 budget, as well as the preliminary fiscal year 22 budget. So just give me a second here so that I can pull my presentation up. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll actually start with our revised fiscal year 21 budget. As most of you already know, and as part of our discussions throughout the better part of this school year, we've had some ups and downs with our enrollment projections due to COVID-19. As well as what had been originally presented in June to the board with our projected revenue sitting at about $102.6 million. At that point in time, we'd seen an upward trend in our enrollment numbers. And then when the actual numbers started to flow in with students coming into our buildings, we started to see a shift within our enrollments, and that actually forced us to start looking at revising our budget and making sure that our numbers are aligning with our resources. So what I have here is a revised FY21 revenue and expenditures what we factored in is a matter of fact, considering that we ended up receiving some more resources from the federal and state government due to the stimulus package through the CARES Act funds. So we have ASA 1 funds, which we actually were allocated by the federal and the state government, amounting to $725,819 under the ASA 190%. We have about $143,000 under the 9.5 ASA 1 funds, $136,000 under the GEAR funds, and about $1.966 million under the coronavirus relief funds. So in total, we have additional $2.9 million, which were allocated to the district. Out of that $2.9 million at this point in time, we've been able to claim reimbursements from the state of the $1.966 million since that had an earlier deadline. And the remaining funds, which amount to about $1,005,000, we are actually working on claiming reimbursement for those. So those funds have been factored into our revised budget, which pushes our revised budget to $104,125,512. Again, considering that our expenditures are mostly tied to staffing. So about 82% of our budget actually is tied to salaries and benefits for our employees. So just considering that in the middle of a year, you can't lay off staff. So some of those components really are difficult to adjust in the middle of a fiscal year. We did make some adjustments within our other discretionary areas, but from a revised standpoint, we are looking at about $104,854,687 for our revised general fund expenditures, which leaves us with a deficit of about $729,000 for the fiscal year 21. Considering and also putting into perspective some of the cost-saving measures we realized when we looked at our fiscal year 20 budget, we're able to set aside some resources knowing that it wasn't certain of where we would be standing with our projections and our actual enrollments. So that $729,000 projected deficit will be actually covered by those resources without us dipping into our fund balance or transferring any resources from our trust funds. So at this point in time, that's what we have for our revised 21 budget. Hopefully, as the year goes by, as we try to identify other cost-saving measures, we'll get a better revised number through the audit later on in the year. So that's what I have for fiscal year 21. My next slide will actually walk us through our preliminary allocations, components, and assumptions for fiscal year 22. Again, we've had a series of meetings with the community. We have had a series of meetings with the board. And these are some of the assumptions we've put into play as we planned and started allocating resources for our fiscal year 22. So one of the baselining foundation was to actually develop a formula-based staffing model, which we called predictive staffing model, which is the base allocation of resources we need from a staffing perspective to actually open a building. So the base allocation has been used as the foundation for actually building and allocating resources into our buildings. We are also factoring in a zero or flat federal and state revenue increase. Again, not knowing where we'll be standing as far as an additional increases of revenue. In the past, we've always received a 1 to 2% increase from the state formulas. And I know the governor had actually alluded to a 1% increase, but those numbers are not concrete. We'll be getting more information. So at this point in time, from a conservative standpoint, we are just budgeting at a flat rate. We also factored in our 3% increase in cost of living adjustments, an additional 2% increase in our fringe benefits, and those factors have been put into perspective as we did the costing for predictable staffing as well as of our overall budget. The other components which are also new into our budget categorical and discretionary funds which are being channeled into the buildings as a way to supplement the base allocations. So we have compensatory dollars, we have achievement and integration dollars, we have title dollars, we have other capital projects levy dollars, which we are actually giving into the buildings, and they will be used at the discretion of the building leadership and their teams to supplement to what has been allocated through the predictable staffing model. We also have factored into perspective allocations which are operational, so things like supplies, purchase services, contracted services, which we need on a daily basis to actually maintain our operations. So those have been factored into our predictable staffing allocations. What we've not factored into perspective here is the additional ASAF 2 and GEAR 2 funds, which we just received confirmation from the state that will be receiving a little over about $2.6 million. And those funds will be coming back to the board at some point in time after we have figured out the priorities and what we need to use those funds to advance our learning losses in our buildings, as well as other components which are really tied to the pandemic. So those are the components which were put into perspective as we develop our fiscal year 22 budget. The next slide gives us the preliminary overall allocation of our resources. So right now, from a projection standpoint, with our general fund revenue, we are looking at general fund of $105,032,924. And what we've done with these resources is we've added a component of the capital projects levy. Part of the capital projects levy in the past has been allocated to the general fund for staffing purposes, and another part had been allocated to our capital and construction projects as part of the refreshments for our devices and other technological infrastructures. So those funds have been, from a flexibility standpoint, have been moved to actually be added together with our other general education aid. So from an expenditure perspective, due to our predictable staffing model reductions, and as well as our department reductions, which we'll discuss further in the presentation, we are anticipating a total general fund expenditures of $105,032,924, which actually structurally balance our budget. The next slide, I'll deep dive into how the general fund allocation, that $105,032,924, will be allocated across our different needs in our system. So about 61% will be allocated directly into the buildings through the predictable staffing model, through the operational allocations, through the categorical dollars, which I just mentioned in my previous slide, with compensatory achievement and integration, federal programs. So they account up to $64,575,597. Departments will get an allocation of 6%, which is about $6,783,893. And the departments which are actually central office-based include business services, human resources, the central office portion of innovation, design and learning, communication, our governance and management, which comprises the board, the superintendent's office. Some of the allocations actually impacting the buildings. For example, the graduation expenses are all budgeted under the department allocation. The other component, which is about the 33%, is the district-wide allocations, which amount to about $33,673,434. Those allocations are actually tied to transportation. They are tied to our operations and maintenance, for example, our custodians, our utilities in our buildings and grounds. They are also tied to some of our mandated business requirements with insurance, our workers' compensation insurance, our unemployment insurance, our property and casualty insurance. They are also tied to other benefits components with other post-employment benefits, as well as of some of the retiree premiums. So those components are all factored under the district-wide allocation to give us a total disbursement of $105,032,924. And again, this is not factoring into perspective any of the additional case funds which we'll be receiving in the future. The next slide actually shows some of the reductions which have been taken by central office departments with the 7% reduction. So that list is showing those components which kind of factors in some of the reductions we had to take it at central office departments, which amount to about $1.1 million, and the difference really being factored into the predictable staffing model. So that is what I have as far as the revised FY21 budget and the preliminary FY22 budget, which we'll be asking the board to approve tonight. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Director Chapaduka. And I'd like our community to know that we had a really excellent conversation with Director Chapaduka and Director and Dr. Lightfoot helped to add information to that during our workshop, and really appreciate all the many, many months of work that have gone into this process to be able to be at this point tonight to approve the preliminary budget. So with that, I'd open it up for comments and questions from my board colleagues. Director Peterson.
Thanks, Chair Bouchard. So I think it's more comments. I'm usually pretty succinct, but I kind of have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this that I just want to share, especially in contrast between where we were at last year in these conversations and where we're at this year. And so, you know, in 2020, we were looking at very detailed and specific plans with very pinpointed dollars. That at the time felt very much like an us versus them in these conversations. It felt really uncomfortable at times. And those things were, it was a really tough year for budget conversations last year, right? And while the positives of that were that we had specific and detailed and pinpointed dollars, the downside was very much a robbing Peter to pay Paul almost feeling as we had these conversations. As we're moving forward this year, it feels like, and it is, an entirely different process. And for that, I'm incredibly thankful for the time and effort that went into these this work. On the upside, I absolutely love that this is allowing schools to make decisions that are right for the individual schools and giving equal funds across our buildings based on the number of students that are enrolled in each school. I like that, feels right to me, and like we should have been doing that all along. The thing that I struggled with, and it's not as much a con as it is a reality, is that it's a little bit nebulous because it's a new program, And so I've struggled with having the right questions to ask a little bit. But the bottom line is that our financial position is what it is, and it cannot really be changed. And so, and the other bottom line really is that I trust and believe in our administration and our principals in putting this plan together. And while I don't feel like we have all the answers, I truly believe that this is the right direction forward for Hopkins. And I'm really optimistic about what we're going to be able to do under this type of a budgeting model. That said, my ask of the administration is going to be probably, and we get really great and detailed information from you guys, but probably an increase in the communication from the school level and from the principals on how this is going for them. And the ability for them to feel like they have access to us as a sounding board, as well as we talk about a teal organization, and really feeling like we're flattening that out. As we go forward with this, which I do believe in it, I would really love our principals and our other departmental leaders to feel like they have our ear and that we can address their concerns as we move forward. And overall, I'm really optimistic, knowing kind of all of our realities. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Peterson. Director Adams.
Yes, thank you, Chair Bouchard. You know, I don't think you mentioned it in your presentation, Director Chapanduka, but this is going to result in a headcount reduction across the district. And somewhere in the neighborhood of, it sounds like 16 to 19 FTEs that will be reduced. And we don't know where those are going to be at this point. But it is going to be a reduction, and I want people to be prepared for that. I also want them to make them aware that, and this is my annual sermon that I give, the reason we're in this position is that there's a lack of will on the part of our state legislature to fully fund education, and especially public education. As we were having our workshop before this meeting, I got an email from the Association of Metropolitan School Districts that there's an impasse on education funding at the state legislature, and that the House is asking, and the governor are asking for, in the neighborhood of 750 some million for public education. The Senate is asking for 160 million. So they're only $600 million apart, which is going to be huge. And there's no will on the part of them, apparently, to come to a compromise before the end of session. So we won't know until we've passed our final budget, probably in May, what the actual number is that we're going to get. But if you look at the history, in 2003, our students on an inflation-adjusted basis were getting $659 more than they are today. If we were getting that amount, additional $659 per student today, we'd have an additional $4 million, over $4 million per year that we could spend on education. We aren't getting that. And in fact, the Senate has proposed in their bill, in their omnibus bill so far, and I testified against it, that they take dollars from public education and redirect it to private and parochial schools. And I was just astounded that they would even attempt to do that, because 80% of the private schools in Minnesota are religiously affiliated. So that means they're going to be using public dollars to fund religious education, which in my estimation, I've read the state constitution, that's not allowed. So I think people ought to get exercised about this. They're starving our public schools and then rewarding students that leave the public school system and go to private schools, or attempting to do that anyway. So that's why we're in this situation. It's not fun. I wish we didn't have to eliminate 16 to 20 additional headcount this year, but it's the reality. So I just want the public to be aware of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Adams. Director Cool.
Thank you, Chair Burchard. As a new member of the school board, I came in essentially in late January, February timeframe, and a lot of these budget discussions had already been started. And so as I jumped in and started to really get a crash course by Director Chapanduka and team of all of the steps that they were taking, specifically to have all of the schools right size their staff by using the predictable staffing model. I got a sense immediately of how tough those decisions were to go down that path, and then also just how much work both on the district level and then also on the principal level that it was going to take and will take to continue to be able to make this work best for our scholars. And I totally agree with Director Adams that it is heart-wrenching to hear that there may be any cut in staff. But clearly from everything that I have seen, that doing this direction now, specifically with right-sizing our individual schools, is absolutely the right thing to do for the long-term success of Hopkins schools. And I just am, I'm actually floored with the amount of work and time and leadership that really the entire team, from Director Mary Perry Reed to Director Chapanduka to all of the other team, including Dr. Lightfoot and the entire team. It's been quite amazing watching all of the input that they have allowed to be given by having several public hearings and then taking a huge amount of questions from the board, meeting after meeting after meeting. I just want the public to know that when you think of transparency, it is amazing how transparent this process has been. So thank you for the extended time.
Thank you. Director Adams, did you have an additional comment?
I have a question
Great.
that I know the answer to, but I'd like Director Chapanduka to respond to it. I get people asking me, well, why don't you take some of that CARES money and use that to plug the hole in your budget? You know, our second round, we're going to get, what, 2.6 million, supposedly. And, you know, if we were able to spend that on our teachers this year, we wouldn't have to lay anybody off. Could you please respond to that, Director Chapanduka?
Thank you, Director Adams, for that question, and I'll be happy to respond to that. So part of the CARES funds come with some strings attached. So there are specific ways we can use those funds, and all those have to be related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, these funds are one-time funds, so we can only receive them once, and we can't plan for the long run for with those funds. So one of the things which has been provided to us as part of receiving those funds is that we follow those federal guidelines in as far as what those funds can be used for. And we've used some of these funds to address things with technology. We have used some of these funds to address some of the staffing needs, which were actually one-time staffing needs we had to provide in our buildings. One of the components which has been added to these dollars is that we have to address learning loss. So those are some of the components which we are planning to look into, and what that looks like from a learning loss perspective, what resources we need to bring to the district, just knowing that this is one-time funding. We also have a lot of upgrades we've done in our buildings to address ventilation, to address some of the ionization, to address some of the safety and health needs which we're actually seeing in our buildings due to COVID-19, as well as some of the protective equipment which we had to buy as part of the pandemic mitigation components. So those are some of the factors which we can't really use these resources as a long-range planning or as a way to actually close the budget gap. And these funds are actually use it or lose it. So we just have to be very strategic, which we've been doing. We've been very strategic about how we use those funds to supplement some of the components which are not covered by our overall regular budget.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional board member comments or questions? Well, I'd like to point out to our community that the work that we've been doing since last year is to achieve a structurally balanced budget that does not pull from our fund balance nor from our OPEB trust fund in order to plug holes, and that has been an incredibly detailed process. And so I echo the gratitude that my board members have already expressed to Director Chapanduka, Cabinet, and our principals. Principals work around the predictable staffing model, which is really going to be a game changer for us moving forward as a board as we engage in our budgeting processes in subsequent years, just to have this as a model that we can return to and adjust over time as our funding conditions hopefully change for the better. Because I know after you heard Director Adams' excellent framing of the political context that we're going to see a great increase in advocacy at the state level from our community. I just know it, and that we can hopefully look forward to more robust funding in the years to come. On that note, I do want to thank our community members who advocated for funding relief at the federal level. As you can see, those COVID relief dollars that we received really helped us stay out of an awful situation this year with our budget numbers for 21-22, and so for 2021. So really appreciate all of our community members who advocated, as well as our representatives who worked so hard to get us that funding. Special recognition to the staff of Representative Omar's office, who kept in regular contact with us as a board and as a district, and not only asking what we needed, but then updating us immediately after bills were passed. So really appreciate her team's excellent work on our behalf at the federal level. As we move into our staffing conversation, which will come next, I'd just like to echo the reality that my board colleagues have already acknowledged, that it's incredibly painful to have to say goodbye to members of our Hopkins schools community. As an educator of nearly 21 years, I have found myself in this situation multiple times. It may come as no shock that French teachers are often eliminated when institutions are going through budget reductions, and so I have had my position either eliminated or reduced multiple times throughout my career, and so I empathize absolutely with both the difficult decisions that our team is making right now, and also the individuals who will be impacted by those decisions. Any additional comments from my board colleagues at this point? So with that, I would look for a motion to approve the fiscal year 2021 revised budget and the fiscal year 21-22 preliminary budget.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second? I have a motion and a second to approve the fiscal year 2021 revised budget and fiscal year 21-22 preliminary budget. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Clerk Peterson.
Director Adams.
Aye.
Director Ahmed. Director Andreessen.
Aye.
Director Khan.
Aye.
Director Cool.
Aye.
Director Peterson. Aye. And Chair Bouchard.
Aye, thank you, Clerk Peterson. We have 6 ayes, 0 nays. Motion carries. Why did I mute myself? Next, we'll move into our staffing resolution, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry Reed.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. And thank you to Director Chapanduka for that thorough budget report and for all of your work and leadership and your team's work and leadership up until this point. I did want to respond to Clerk Peterson's comment about just balancing the clarity that we had last year, even though it was a more painful, well, it wasn't a more painful process, but it was a painful process with the ambiguity that you and we are experiencing this year. And ironically, we did discuss that at our cabinet meeting this morning, and so we are planning on having our Director of Innovation, Design, and Learning, and hopefully a couple of principals at the board table for the April 20 workshop to talk about what program impacts or program transformations schools may be experiencing, both at the primarily at the elementary, but hopefully also at the secondary level, so that we can help our community and all of you navigate the ambiguity as we reach more clarity. I am thankful for Dr. Lightfoot, who was with us to provide a staffing update and to prepare our school board for the first staffing resolution. So I think the good news here is that the predictable staffing model and the sizable discretionary staffing allocations provide to principals, school budgets, a level of flexibility and autonomy that we haven't seen before in Hopkins. And the challenging news is, that, and we've been talking about this in the last few minutes, the challenging news is that our district budget is suffering by being impacted by declining enrollment and chronic underfunding from the state. And because 82% of our district budget is salary and benefits, then the unfortunate result is a loss of staff. And I would like to note that this loss is not as substantial as what other districts are experiencing during this time. I think it's really important to just put this into context. However, any unintended loss of staff is very difficult, because in Hopkins we value our staff and we need our staff to provide a high quality education to our students. But this is the reality that we sit in at this time. And so this is a difficult situation for the individuals who will be impacted, for our schools, for our organization. So Dr. Lightfoot, if you would spend some time providing an overview of the staffing process as well as an aggregate view of what the reduction might look like this spring, that would be really helpful, and thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Superintendent Mary Perry Reed, members of the board. As has already been expressed, and I echo, this is the difficult decision and difficult work that is in front of us as we think about making sure that we are stewards of the dollars that we have and using those in the best way that we can to serve our scholars, families, and community. As part of our staffing process in February, we were in front of you with the resolution that you gave to us to go forward and do the budget work. As you have adopted the preliminary budget this evening, it is now the next resolution in front of you that directs us to go forward and make the necessary program reductions and staff reductions and transformations within the system to meet the terms of the financial limitations that we have, and to make sure that we do that in an expeditious way, in a caring way, and as much of a considerate way as we are able, knowing the gravity of what our principals and our administrators have in front of them, as we have to communicate difficult news to the impacted staff. What we will be doing over the course of the next couple weeks is finalizing the available resource to make sure that we can utilize as much of it as we can fiscally to translate into the positions that we have available for us to keep individuals on staff, and then to plan accordingly should any additional resource be brought forth later, whether that be through the legislative process or that be through other financial opportunities with grants, other kinds of sets of financial conditions that may change throughout the course of our time prior to the next school year. With that being said, the aggregate impact, as you've been looking at the overall budget, does range between 16 to 19, 20 FTEs, depending on what we have with available funds as it relates to licensed individuals. The specifics that are related to licensed individuals have a statutory timeline, and that's why we are in front of you this evening to outline that when we come before you on April 20th, we will have the names of those individuals that will be necessary for us to reduce in order to meet the terms of the financial budget that has been approved this evening. So this evening, it really directs the administration to go forward and do that work. We will be communicating with individuals that are impacted over the next couple weeks to make sure that we can compassionately communicate and make sure that we are making individuals that would be impacted aware of the information prior to the 20th. So with that, prior to the adoption of the resolution, I am available for any additional questions and can be of additional information as is helpful to the board.
Thank you, Dr. Lightfoot. Any questions or comments from my board colleagues?
Chair Bouchard, for the public's edification, I'd like to know how soon affected staff members will be notified if it's decided that their position can't be funded anymore.
Thank you, Director Adams. I appreciate the question. We are working this week and next. Once we have the available information finalized, we want to make sure that we have the funding all spoken for and that we want to be able to give individuals the most accurate and up-to-date information. So our deadline that we have communicated through our Education Association is that we will communicate by April 14th to those individuals who are specifically impacted. Depending on schedules and when people are in building, it's not on one specific day that the communication will occur, and we will try to do that throughout the course of the week because obviously these conversations take time, and we want to make sure that we have the ability for our administrators to have the personalized connection with these conversations as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions? Director Cool.
Thank you, Chair Burchard. Just one quick question. Dr. Lightfoot, how can retirements or will possible retirements affect this number going forward?
It's a great question. Thank you, Director Cool. As part of our budget work that we have been doing over the past couple months, we were able to offer a retirement incentive for those individuals who might be able to consider that to assist with any of the financial impacts to the district. We had a timeline of gathering that information by May 1st. Given that individuals often need to set up time with the Teacher Retirement Association, set up additional opportunities to meet and talk through financial planning, we wanted to make sure that individuals had enough time to take that into consideration. We thought that the May timeframe would at least give us opportunity that if we did need to adjust based on any retirements that would come in, that we would have specific time available to do that, specifically within May prior to the end of the school year. So some of that information is still in process. We have had individuals already express interest in that and have made decisions to move forward with that. So it is in process and continuing up through May as well.
So any of those that you may believe are likely, have they been included in this conversation or have not?
You mean those who have been likely to be impacted by the retirement option, or those who may have positions that might be depending to be preserved based on if individuals choose to retire?
Probably the latter. When we're taking a look at the 16 to 20 positions, has any retirements above and beyond will affect that number? Yes or no?
Yeah, those that we know of specifically, yes, we have already planned for. Those that might be happening, we have an idea, but like I said, sometimes, and it's interesting, it's about a 4 to 5 week time frame for people to even get in to get appointments scheduled with Teachers Retirement Association. So we did connect this past week, and they have some virtual webinars and are doing some reach outs potentially that we might be able to bring to the full group of individuals who would potentially qualify. So we're hoping to try some efforts to expedite that in case people are finding any barriers to be able to get in to have some of those conversations. So those will be forthcoming as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional board member comments or questions? Then I will read the staffing resolution and look for a motion. Resolution modifying educational programs and positions. Whereas the School Board of Independent School District 270 adopted a resolution on February 16th, 2021, directing the administration to make recommendations for modifications in programs and positions. And whereas said programming and fiscal resources available have been preliminarily approved by the school board, be it resolved by the School Board of Independent School District 270 that the administration use the preliminary 2021-2022 school year budget to determine the specific FTE reductions that are necessary to meet the 2021-2022 school year financial terms and present the necessary licensed FTE reductions at the April 20th, 2021 school board meeting. I would look for a motion to approve this resolution.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the resolution. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Clerk Peterson.
Director Adams.
Aye.
Director Ahmed. Vice Chair Andreessen.
Aye.
Director Khan.
Aye.
Director Kuhl.
Aye.
Director Peterson. Aye. And Chair Bouchard.
Aye. Thank you, Clerk Peterson. We have 6 ayes, 0 nays. Motion carries. Next, we'll move into our board member reports. Who would like to go first?
Don't everyone jump at the chance.
I know, right?
I'll go first, and I apologize for missing the treasurer's report because I had a power situation. I'm weighing in here from Plymouth, Michigan today, and at my son's house and son and daughter-in-law. So things are a little chancy here. At any rate, it's kind of a short board member report. Weekly, I have been participating along with the Legislative Action Coalition in the Minnesota School Board Association chat every Friday morning. And it lasts from 9 until 9:30, and actually anybody can participate. But it's the chief lobbyist for MSBA update anyone that's concerned or interested in what's going on at the legislature, things they think we should be advocating for, things we ought to be advocating against. And that, as I said, happens every Friday morning, except last Friday. Did not happen then. And likewise, on the 19th and 26th of March, the chat was followed by an advocacy workshop that a number of us attended, and some great speakers, some great ideas. I was disappointed in the last one that was going to be on March 26th, that Ruth Richardson, who chairs the House Education Policy Subcommittee, failed to show. And so we did not get benefit of her insight into what she anticipates to be in the final omnibus bill for the House. But so that was disappointing. Then on March 20th, I attended the town hall with Representative Patty Acom and Senator Ann Johnson Stewart. Not much to report from that. Most of the questions that came up were not related to education. They were more related to, I think it was, what was the hot topic that week? Cannabis legislation or something like that. And then also every Friday following the LA or the MSBA chat and workshop, LAC meets on a regular basis to discuss what our next move should be. I was so moved by something that was included in the state the House Omnibus Bill, Education Omnibus Bill, that I ended up writing a letter, which went to all of our legislators last week, regarding their intent to delay civics education from 9th grade, as we currently do it, to 11th or 12th grade. And we did get a response back from Senator Swedzinski, who's been shepherding this through the legislature. But it didn't seem to address the issue of why they're choosing to delay it. It only said that anyone that takes AP history or civics in high school will get credit for it, which they already do. So I don't know what the outcome of that will be. But at any rate, it concerns me that they're trying to make us delay teaching civics until kids are nearly out of high school. My experience has been, and a lot of us in LAC agreed, that kids get so energized in 9th grade that they start showing up at board meetings, writing letters to the editor, vying to be on our student school board. It seems to really motivate them. And I'd hate to see that lost for 9th, 10th, and possibly 11th grade. So I think it would be great if we continue to teach it early in the cycle at the secondary level, rather than wait till a kid's almost out of high school. And let's see, what else do I have to report? I guess that's basically it. I did mention earlier that there is a portion of the Senate Omnibus Bill that I testified against at the state legislature that would divert public funds to religious education, religious education institutions. I don't support that. The constitutional prohibition against that is pretty obvious. And I'm just really surprised and disappointed that it was included in the Senate Omnibus Bill. And by the way, the House is proposing a 2% increase in the general ed funding. The Senate is proposing 0. So there's going to be a lot of work done at the legislature over the next 6 weeks.
Thank you, Director Adams. Any other board member reports this evening? Director Cool.
Thank you, Chair Pritchard. Just 2 things quickly. In mid-March, I was able to attend the Elevate Symposium that was put on by the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. And I attended that with Tim, our CTE director. And a couple of very interesting presentations that was labeled Best Practices for Education and Business Partnerships was done by North Hennepin and SPS Commerce. And it was probably the most impactful strategy session of how to create better partnerships with businesses in school districts that are not only financially driven, but also to continue to help with giving our scholars more information about what career they would like to perform. And so there was some great information given. And then just 2 weeks ago, Director Khan and I were both able to be a part of the African American community conversation. And I've got to say that one of the most amazing moments happened during that conversation that was inspiring and then also very heartbreaking at the same time. One of our scholars opened up to the group, explaining an experience that he had just went through, involving being pulled over by an officer and essentially being treated in a way that is too reminiscent of what happened to George Floyd. Thankfully, the outcome was much different, but just the strength that this young man had, who is a senior, was something that, quite honestly, I've never experienced, and it really just showed the importance of those phone calls and just how amazing our scholars really are. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other board member reports this evening?
Chair Bouchard.
Vice Chair Andreessen.
Thank you. I just wanted to quick follow up with Steve's plug on many levels to get involved and get active with the legislature right now. Call all of your representatives, tell them that schools need funding. You can even reference how many teachers this could impact in Hopkins if they don't do something for education. And then in particular, issues, there are specific issues that are on the table right now in those omnibus bills that have a really big impact. But a lot of them, while we support them in theory, they are not attaching any funding to them. So again, we're going to be in a situation where there aren't the dollars to do everything that we know needs to be done for our students. So you don't have to read the whole bill. It's really long. I think Steve's the only one who's had the fortitude to wade through all of it. But there are definitely some pieces in there. The civics thing, I think, is a big issue. And I think we need to talk about why we don't support that. But in particular, there are some, I have also wrote a letter around school nutrition and departments and separating our funding, making parents and families apply to get funding. I think we all know that that's just not a sustainable model. And so hopefully we can get the legislature to do something about that instead of telling us as a school district that we should be in the business of being debt collectors to our families. So hoping that everyone can make some calls, have conversations, tell the legislature how what they do impacts their family. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other board member reports this evening?
Chair Bouchard.
Yes, Director Khan.
I just wanted to add to what Director Cools was saying about our attendance at the African American Family Virtual Session. It was really nice to hear that there are a bunch of students who have gotten together and they're coming up with the best way to address restorative practices. I forgot the girl's name. Do you remember? There are two. It's George Jackson, and then there was another student. Oh, okay. Okay.
Elise.
Thank you, Elliot. Elliot said it too. So yeah, I was really impressed that they are coming up with, restorative justice practices with a bunch of students and administrators and staff members. So those were one of the things that stood out, and along with George Jackson's discussion about how he was dealt with. I think it was in Wisconsin, unfortunately, and he's a very brave gentleman. To be so open and honest about what he went through. And that's my report.
Thank you. Any additional reports this evening? Okay, well, we're so fortunate that tonight during our incidental reports, we get to welcome Allegra Smishek, Jessica Glidden, and Cassie Buffalohead to the table. As we as a board are very invested in both repairing our relationship with our Indigenous students and families in this district and continuing to foster. Excuse me, Director Khan, do you mind muting?
Oh my God,
I'm hearing myself in 4 places, and I'm like, I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. Okay, no, don't worry about it. So we as a board are very invested in both repairing our relationships with our Indigenous families and scholars in Hopkins schools and working to create an environment where all of our Indigenous scholars can truly thrive and show up as 100% who they are, and that all of our Hopkins students, our scholars throughout Hopkins schools, can learn about the incredibly important histories and knowledges that our Indigenous families and scholars bring to us here in Hopkins. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Mary Perry Reed to introduce our presenters for the evening.
Thank you, Chair Bouchard. And yes, we are delighted to have guests with us this evening. So additional context is that during the 1920 school year, the Hopkins American Indian Parent Advisory Committee, otherwise known as APAC, made a vote of non-concurrence, meaning that the school board and district were not in compliance with Minnesota statutes and were not meeting the needs of all of our American Indian students here in Hopkins. So APAC then provided specific recommendations to our school board, and we have our guests with us this evening to provide an update on those recommendations. So I am pleased to ask our Assistant Director of IDL, Allegra Smishek, to introduce Jessica Glidden and Cassie Buffalohead, and the 3 of them will provide this report. And thanks to all 3 of you for being here this evening.
Thank you, Superintendent Mary Perry Reed, and thank you, Chair Bouchard, for that introduction. I'm thrilled to be here tonight and joined by 2 of my favorite colleagues. Cassie Buffalohead is the chair of our American Indian Parent Advisory Committee. She has been an absolute force the past 5 years and prior, but on my radar, the past 5 years in educating me and many people in our system about the importance of American Indian education, both our legal responsibilities as well as why there's such a strong need for it in our school district. And she was also part of our interview and hiring process to bring Jessica Glidden, our new American Indian program lead and cultural liaison, to the district. And it has been absolutely remarkable to work with her. And she is tireless and passionate. And I am in awe of her every day with all that she's doing with our scholars. So I think I will, with that, hand it over to Cassie. She wanted to share with all of you what a big impact Jessica has made this past year.
Hi, so I'm Cassie Buffalohead. I know a few of you and have been able to spend some time with some of you. So thank you for having me. I am the co-chair of the American Indian Parent Advisory Committee, also known as APAC, and our role as a committee is really to support the Hopkins Indian Ed program. So I wanted to just spend briefly a couple minutes kind of highlighting the impact that the Hopkins Indian Ed program has had this year, and also share how the APAC committee voted this year. I think the biggest thing is that we were finally able to hire a full-time person, which was Jessica. And as much as hard work as Allegra and the APAC committee was trying to get this Indian Ed program going and in full force, we just didn't have the capacity to do it. And since Jessica took on this role just 5 months ago, I mean, just a huge increase in participation, both with students and parents in our program. Prior to Jessica being here, we had several events and several meetings throughout the school year, but it was just not nearly what it needed to be. If you take a look at Indian Ed programs in other districts, just even surrounding us, they have very, very strong Indian Ed programs, and we were really lacking. And Jessica has just done a phenomenal job in 5 months in a pandemic, getting people involved. She's done things in the last 5 months that we as a committee and Allegra have been trying to do for the last 4 years. And she has a really great vision for where our program is going to go going forward. And I'm really excited about that. Just a couple of things I wanted to talk about really quick that Jessica's done with our kids this year that was non-existent prior to this year. She's meeting with our students every week. She's doing cultural activities with them. She's creating community, and she's supporting their educational journeys as Indigenous students. In our elementary schools, she started a book club for 1st through 4th grade, and they're reading books by Indigenous authors. And it's going so well that now even the high school students want to start a book club. So that's been amazing. She's brought in outside cultural resources to teach our kids different things. They did like a virtual wild rice demonstration a few weeks ago. We partnered with McGizzy, and they did kind of an introduction to Ojibwe language kind of virtual event with us. She's also been in communication with other programs for like post-secondary stuff through the University of Minnesota and ACT prep. She's just done such an amazing job getting this program together. So we did vote this year in concurrence, and I think there's like an official statement I'm going to read here in a little bit, but I don't know where that's at on our slide here. So I will hand it. Oh, is Allegra bringing it up? Let's see. So we, the American Indian Parent Advisory Committee, issue a vote of concurrence. We attest that the school board and district are compliant with the Minnesota statutes, and that the school board and or district are meeting the needs of American Indian students. And I'll hand it back over to Allegra.
Thank you, Cassie. And Cassie, I know you might need to go, so just do that when you have to. Yeah. Okay, I'll go back. And Jessica, if you would have anything you want to add to Cassie's summary there, that would be great.
Thank you, guys. Wow, you really know how to make somebody feel really good. So thank you guys for having us. Bonjour, my name is Jessica Glidden. I am Ojibwe from Boys Fort Reservation in northern Minnesota. And as you know, I'm the American Indian program lead and cultural liaison. And just a little bit about our American Indian program. Our programs offering the exploration of Indigenous narratives, heritage, and history while helping our scholars succeed by being the bridge between cultural and school. Our groups are meeting 1 to 2 times per month, where we have thoughtful conversations about our Indigenous culture, learning activities, and culturally relevant crafts. Just to add on to that, a lot of our scholars that are coming to these groups have little cultural support at home or background, and they're coming to these groups completely on their own. They're not getting participation. They're not getting attendance for coming to these groups, and they're coming because they want to have that cultural connection. They want to learn and be with like-minded students. So this is a breakdown of our American Indian students in Hopkins. So for the 2021 school year, we do have 121 scholars that identify as American Indian. You'll see the breakdown for each of the schools there on the left. As Cassie had said, our Native American Book Club is what we're doing for grades 1 through 4, where we're reading Native American authored books, in addition to doing some Native American crafts that support the book club, such as an Ojibwe bandolier bag to hold their books. And then we're also doing some dream catcher lessons where they'll construct their own dream catcher and learn about that lesson as well. Our 5th and 6th grade group and the book club meets once a month virtually. The 5th and 6th grade Native group, we touch a little on history and a lot about powwow norms and the different dance styles. Again, that age group especially has little to no cultural background, so they come and join our group and are very curious and eager to learn about their culture. And we have an upcoming virtual field trip through the National Museum of the American Indian for 5th and 6th grade group, and then they're working on an Ojibwe medicine wheel right now as well. And our secondary scholars, they are really interested in our accurate American Indian history. We do a lot of PSEO support through the University of Minnesota. They have a new American Indian Studies program, ACT support with some extra funding there to help support them get some outside help and structure through Kaplan University. And the secondary students are also working on different projects at home. We make these at-home kits that they can pick up. We distribute to each school so that even though we're doing virtual lessons, they have these culturally relevant crafts that they can have sensory items right in front of them that support the lesson. And they also have upcoming virtual field trips through the National Museum of the American Indian. Make sure I'm not missing anything here. We will also be doing a feather ceremony for our Hopkins graduates. We have 5 seniors this year that are on track to graduate, so that will be really exciting for them. So I'm happy and excited to bring that to Hopkins this year. And then, Allegra, I will let you go through the recommendations.
Thank you. So as Dr. Mary Perry Reed mentioned, last year the APAC voted non-concurrent, and they brought 4 large recommendations to the school board. And so I just wanted to update the board on how we've responded to those recommendations as a district. The first was to contribute funds toward an American Indian education lead salary and benefits. And Jessica Glidden was hired in October of this year. And I think Cassie did a great job of explaining that impact. And I loved hearing again, Jessica, all the work that you're doing. The second recommendation was to provide professional development to staff on how to be culturally responsive to Native American students and families. In May, Jessica will be facilitating a roundtable discussion with Dr. Brown and Alex Fisher to offer professional development for Hopkins staff. It's also going to be available to student and community members. Jessica also shared an opportunity with staff about a Language Matters webinar to learn more about terminology related to Native people. We're going to continue to seek out and share PD opportunities. I don't think this is a checkbox. I think it's ongoing and something that we'll continue to work on next year and beyond. Another recommendation was for each building to create plans around providing space for their program meetings and clubs. And actually, as an edit, we have now gotten contacts with 10 of our 10 schools. So Jessica, I'll connect with you about that. We're working with, Jessica's working with Dr. Stanley Brown to make sure that there is support and ensure equity in decisions for our school organizations. And we've also made sure to identify one or more staff members at each building. we found in the past that it was really difficult for outside organizations connected to our American Indian Ed program to navigate our enormous system with 10 schools. And so having that contact person at each building is really crucial. Jessica mentioned the circles, or maybe you didn't. You might want to add a little more. But I know some members have, board members have attended the parent talking circles in response to encouraging our district leadership and board members to interact with APAC. Also, our superintendent, a couple of our board members, myself, and our district equity and inclusion director have met a couple of times this year to provide updates and get input on how our district can be more supportive of Native students and families.
Okay, I will speak about some of our student projects. And I did forget to speak about the parent talking circle. So in addition to the student support and the family support, we also offer parent support by our monthly parent talking circle, where any of our Indigenous parents, grandparents, aunties can hop on virtually and connect with other guardians and parents in the district, and we share resources. We have open conversations, and that's been going really well as well. And so far we've had really good response and attendance in that program. So I'm excited that we have started that program as well. So these are some of our student projects. So as I spoke before, our secondary students and our fifth and sixth grade students are working on a Ojibwe medicine wheel. So these are some of the secondary students' painted canvas medicine wheel. So this is an Ojibwe medicine wheel. And this was a really fun project for them to work on virtually, learning about each aspect of the medicine wheel and the meanings in our Native American culture. And then for them to incorporate the wheel with their own style for their background. It was a really good day and a good lesson for them. We really had fun with that one. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So one of our lessons virtually, we talked about harvesting wild rice and a lesson about where the rice comes from and the entire process. And at the end of that lesson, I shared a quick, simple wild rice recipe that one of our students sent me an email and asked me for the recipe. And like the next day, she went out and got the ingredients to make the recipe. And this was just her picture of her recipe that she made at home. And she says here that she remembered from the lesson that I showed them this salad-like food where there was wild rice, walnuts, and blueberries, and maple syrup. And I just wanted to tell you I'll be making that tomorrow for lunch. We have everything, and I'm making the rice tonight. I'm so excited. And that was from one of our 8th grade students. And she followed up with another email saying that everybody in her family liked it and they will be incorporating it into their meal planning going forward. So that was really nice because sometimes you just don't know virtually how much they're going to retain when you're doing these virtual lessons and these recipes. And she made the recipe and really enjoyed it. So that was exciting feedback there. Go ahead for the next one. This is from one of our 12th grade students saying that I'm so thankful this group was created and I'm able to meet and connect with you. Thank you so much. I can't wait for what is ahead of us. So again, just speaking on the fact that these students were really craving this cultural connection and really excited for the Native group that we're able to provide now. So that was really nice feedback from her as well. So this is kind of where we're headed. And this is just a brief overview of some of the field trips that once we're able to safely resume in person, some of the ideas that we have for the future is visiting the Mankato 38+2 Dakota Memorial Site, the Treaty Site History Center. There's some Ojibwe camps at Wolf Ridge camp up north, connecting more students with the American Indian Studies at University of Minnesota, doing some field trips to the different museums. The one shown in the picture here is from the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe Museum, getting connected with some canoeing and outdoor activities, We have opportunity to participate in an Indian horse camp, and then also have an Indian horse name ceremony where they will make a horse mask. In addition to the field trips, in the future, we're looking to collaborate with other schools and start a West Metro Indian Education Committee, which I have already started this year and have 7 of our West Metro neighboring schools on board to collaborate. That collaboration will allow us to hold a West Metro powwow, either something that we can decide to do on our own in Hopkins or collaborate with the other schools. So that's exciting news. Another way for us to share resources and connect with the schools around us. So I'm excited. We have big plans. Any questions?
Well, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. It's so great to learn about all of the culturally affirming work that is happening. And, you know, to quote APAC Chair Buffalo Head, in a pandemic, no less, right? That you've been able to accomplish all of this for our scholars. Just feeling a lot of gratitude. It's so awkward we have the masks on because I've been like smiling ear to ear the entire time, but I think it just looks like I'm like, and just really, really appreciate you being with us this evening, all 3 of you, to give us a chance to really hear about the details of the recommendations and how the district has been meeting those. Also wanted to express gratitude to the entire APEC group that made the recommendations last year, and then also the group members who we've been able to meet with as board members since that time. It's just been a really important experience for us as a board. And so I hope that you'll pass our gratitude along to the entire committee. Any additional comments or questions from my board colleagues? Oh, Director Cool. Or was your hand up from before? Oh, the little hands are confusing me. Okay, sorry. Any additional board member comments or questions?
Chair Bouchard.
Yes, Vice Chair Andreessen.
Thank you. I just wanted to also express my gratitude. I think you've done amazing work. And in particular, in a really tough environment for creating connections, even across school sites and grade bands, and just really, really grateful and impressed. Thank you.
Excellent. With that, I would look for a motion that the board accept the incidental report.
I so move.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to accept the incidental report. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Clerk Peterson.
Director Adams.
Aye.
Director Ahmed. Vice Chair Andreessen.
Aye.
Director Khan.
Aye.
Director Cool.
Aye.
Director Peterson. Aye. And Chair Bouchard.
Aye. Thank you, Clerk Peterson. We have 6 ayes, 0 nays. Motion carries. Thank you so much to all 3 of you for being with us tonight. It was really good to see you and to meet you, Jessica. And with that, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
I'm going to say you all want to stick around. I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? Seeing none, Clerk Peterson.
Director Adams.
Aye.
Vice Chair Andreessen.
Aye.
Director Khan.
Aye.
Director Cool.
Aye.
Director Peterson. Aye. Chair Bouchard.
Aye. Thank you, Clerk Peterson. We have 6 ayes, 0 nays. Motion carries. This meeting of the Hopkins School Board is adjourned at 8:48 p.m. Thank you all.
Thank you.